Welcome to a new webcast of the Life Science Acceleration Alliance. Today we want to talk about the US-UK pharma trade deal, which is of great interest to the EU and member states, but not much is really known about it. And there are some who say it's a great deal. It could be a wonderful role model for the EU, and others say not so much. So we thought we invite two experts from the UK to talk about this and get their insights. With us today are Stuart Thomson and Andy Wilkens. Welcome.
Thank you.
If you would be so kind to please briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your expertise and background, and then we can move into the subject.
Sure, I'll go first if that's okay. So my name's Stuart Thomson. My day job is that I'm a public affairs and communications consultant. So I help organisations engage with governments, mainly the UK, but across Europe and wider as well. And alongside that, I've written some books about public affairs and communications, and there's even a podcast as well. So hopefully I'll bring some of that insight about political engagement to the discussion today. And thank you hugely for the invitation to speak. I'm looking forward to being involved.
Thank you.
My name's Andy Wilkens. I run my own think and do tank called Future of Health, which does what it says on the tin. I think we all agree we stand at the dawn of the greatest changes in science, medicine, and technology in human history. So, what does all this mean for the unfolding story of health and the health sector, the life sciences sector? That's something I've been focusing on. So, I've been doing a lot of work on what long-term futures might arise out of more collective ecosystemic working. I run a program at Imperial College Business School called Leading Systemic Innovation in Healthcare. How do we go from silos to systems of healthcare, which is really inviting multiple actors that don't really talk to each other enough to come together and sort of plan out what a new ecosystem could look like. And I also work with different parts of the healthcare system to try and bring this into reality, both at the hospital trust level, but also the UK integrated care systems, where we're trying to bring multiple actors together to plan systemic futures that really make a difference to population health. So a mixture of the thinking and the doing, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation as well. It's a very important one.
Well, thank you for giving us your time, and I look forward to the discussion too. And let's start with what is this wonderful deal? I mean, we have two viewpoints. One is the policy side, one is more the system and understanding of the national health system side. So, how would you describe that? What has been agreed upon? What is it?
Well, I mean, I think of it more as a political framework, more than a detailed trade agreement. So therefore, it sets some general guiding principles out, but actually leaves the detail until later. And to be honest with you, across UK politics, that's the way that it's gone in recent years. Is when politicians and governments are often working on new ideas, new initiatives. If legislation comes forward or there's a trade deal or new regulations, sometimes it's the broad parameters that are set out, but the detail comes later through negotiations. And I think you can view that in one of two ways, a little bit as you've sort of outlined already, Rainer, which is, that's either a sort of almost, well, why should so much be left to chance almost? Why isn't there more known? Why isn't there more clarity on what the policy or the deal in this case looks like? And that would be a fair challenge. On the other hand, for those organizations and member states that are looking at this particular deal, well, actually, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do some more engagement, to try and shape that a little more than would be otherwise been able to be the case if it was really set out in distinct clarity, I think. So I think that would be my first point. And I think the other point, and I'll be the one to get the early mention of the B word out there. So Brexit. Look, all of this deal, other deals with the US, deals with European Union, deals with across the world, have to be seen in the context of that political setting, which is, what does Britain want to be in the new world order that is post-Brexit? What does that look like? What are our relationships like? So this is partly about showing that deals can be done. We don't know the detail, but there is a deal there. So I think those, again, back to those idea of the broad principles.
And that's a very good framing of it, Stuart. I think there are some details in the policy which are quite illuminating. So there is a part of the agreement is that the rebate scheme has reduced somewhat the amount of rebate that the pharmaceutical industry will pay the NHS if they go over the planned quota, which is obviously very attractive to pharma companies, which were facing quite a steep, I think it was up around 27% last year. So bringing that down to 14-15% is going to mean more of the profits can stay with the pharma companies. And also this changing the NICE guidelines on QALYs, the sort of price range has been increased from 20 to 30,000 to I think it's 25 to 35,000. So that increase means more of the innovative drugs that perhaps cost a little bit more will be able to be prescribed. And I think if you look at that in the round, I think it's in part, as we know, the most favored nation status means that with collapsing prices in the US market, there is pressure to shift from the pharma companies their profits to other markets. And in the context of the trade deal that was being generated, there's an opportunity for the UK here to make itself a more attractive place for pharmaceutical investment and as a market. But in exchange for 0% on UK pharma exports to the US for a period of 3 years. So that also positions the UK as a more stable place for doing business to export to the US. So I think the combination of all of this, the trade deal, the pharma deal, is really an attempt by the UK to respond to what's happening in the US in a way that positions possibly the UK as being a more attractive place for innovation, for pharma companies to develop, and for its own life sciences sector. The challenge, of course, is that it's going to involve increasing the amount that we pay for medicines, and who's going to pay for that? What's the impact of how that's metabolized into the NHS system? That's something that is still to be worked through, but something we can perhaps explore in this conversation.
And just to add to that, Andy, I think you're entirely right. That theme of stability for the UK. I mean, the reality is, up until the last sort of 18, nearly 24 months of this current government, we went through, and you sort of lose track of the number of prime ministers that we had. That constant churn didn't provide any level of stability or the idea to international investors that the UK would be a good place to invest. Pharma being one example, but many others as well across the life sciences industry. So part of this government's agenda is, look, let's get that stability in there in terms of the economy, in terms of some of the the industrial strategy policies, of which life sciences has one as well. And again, we can touch on that as we go through. I think that's a really important point for the UK as a whole. And if you look at what the different parts of the UK are talking about, so the growth plans, whether it's across the East Midlands where I currently do some work, or up in Liverpool where I've been involved in the past, the West Midlands, equally London, but Scotland as well, life sciences is very much at the heart of growth. And growth comes through, at least in part, through stability. So making sure that is there has been again a key driving principle. And again, I think that's, as Andy was explaining, I think that this deal sort of sits in that bucket of necessity for the government as well.
Well, it definitely is a key point for investors. Uncertainty is driving investments away because you don't know what you are getting out of it in the end, and there are too many factors to deal with it. So definitely predictability, stability, that is something that will help attract investments and hopefully grow industry in the country. The EU is struggling with the notion of industrial policy mixed with health policy. We just had an interview of the German health minister, Nina Wagen, where she said she definitely wants to make sure that no new innovative drugs are available to patients in Germany. At the same time, she says what you mentioned before, we have to make sure that we can pay for it. We
Mm.
can't overburden the system and basically not be able to really pay for everything that we need to pay for. And that is really the struggle, I think, that's underlying everything and everywhere. How do you make this work? Now, the question that's related to that, and that's maybe more for Andy, is what kind of impact do you see that having on the national health system and definitely on the patients? I mean, innovative new drugs, more of them faster is definitely on the positive
Mm.
side, but is that realistic? Is the system equipped to handle that? What would you say on that?
Well, definitely raising that threshold at nice level does make possible, I think,
You will
more.
have to explain, sorry, you will have to explain what NICE is because NICE doesn't mean I'm nice, it means NICE, but what does it stand for?
Well, you are nice, Rainer, but yes, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, it is the regulatory body that approves drugs and drug pricing for the NHS, and obviously has a very influential role in this particular conversation. So, as part of the New Deal and arrangement, NICE has agreed to increase the threshold from which of the formulas for drug evaluation. Based on QALYs, I think most people are familiar with those. It's increasing the price range of which a drug will be acceptable to be paid. And what does do is make possible some of the more innovative drugs to be considered more quickly than perhaps otherwise would have been. And in part, this is an attempt by the UK to take advantage of this situation to make the UK a more attractive market for some of the innovative drugs. And I think in the wider context of the increasing, accelerating activity in biotech, this is quite an interesting move. And it would potentially provide faster patient access to some of these innovative drugs, especially perhaps around cancer, immunology, and some of those sectors where most of that activity is taking place. So on the plus side, the UK patients are likely to see faster access to some of these innovative drugs. Some of the commentators are saying maybe 2 to 5 drugs new per year may come through as a result of that. Who knows? We'll wait and see. But I think, to your point also, Rainer, that there comes a cost that wasn't forecast into the planning budget for the NHS. So, who's going to foot the bill for an increased spend in medicines? At the moment, that's not clear. The mood music in the NHS seems to be some of that's going to be stripped out from centralized budgets at the Department of Health and the NHS England. But a significant portion of that's going to be pushed down into providers themselves. So they're going to have to save money somewhere to afford the medicines. And already the healthcare system is under some duress. So I think what we may see is some of the services being provided by healthcare systems in the UK having to be cut maybe on the preventative side and some of the areas that traditionally get cut first when there's a budget pressure. But also, I think there may be some more selectivity in terms of what drugs get approved. To what degree could these new innovations and treatments be integrated into the existing infrastructure? If they need new diagnostics, new clinics, new infrastructure, then that may be more problematic. So we may see some sort of finessing of which of these innovative drugs can be brought in that can adapt and fit into the existing delivery structure that minimizes the costs. So it's not just the cost of the drug, it's the cost of deploying and delivering service that I think are going to be incredibly important parts of that. But we'll have to wait and see how that pans out because nothing's been agreed yet.
I think, I believe it's also something that you are concerned about. Basically, looking at treatments, medication as simply as cost is not really getting us out of where we are.
No.
You have to look at it as an investment and something that pays back, but it goes into other buckets. It provides return for the society. It provides less cost in other parts of the system where people that are healthy need a lot less support than otherwise. They can work again, they can be productive again, and so on. So all in all, we're not looking at the full equation. We're just looking at a certain angle, and we have that issue in Germany too. Everybody is looking to shave off a few cents here and there, and it doesn't really solve the underlying issue. Do you see that changing in the NHS?
Well, there is concern at the Treasury level about the bigger picture. If we take a step back. There's this concern if we keep doing what we're doing, we'll keep getting what we're getting, and just bootstrapping the current model is going to drive us into ever increasing costs because we've got an aging population with more chronic disease and more things to prescribe. And just rolling the clock forward, if we just keep the current model as it is, most of the economists are saying we're probably going to double the cost of our healthcare systems in the next 10 to 15 years, which will bankrupt the country and bankrupt the nation. So, in some ways, there's a certain madness to keep doing what we're doing and use the excuse in the short term we haven't got budgets to do this, and therefore we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. That in itself is a decision to perhaps take the healthcare systems off an edge of a cliff. So we do need a bigger reckoning about what do we do about health and healthcare. And of course, some of the big answers lie in prevention, about early detection, about curative treatments rather than just continuing to treat people on a lifelong basis in the current way. So when you take that bigger picture view, there is a very powerful logic that many of these new innovations and treatments coming through have the opportunity to fundamentally change the balance and trajectory of disease. And it's only through that kind of approach that we're going to be able to get a grip on the runaway costs of healthcare that otherwise would overwhelm health systems and governments across Europe.
Stuart, what is the, well, let's say potential path to implementation? What are the next steps? You both said that it's not really quite certain, so there's a process of no negotiation, I guess, going on. What do you know about the next steps and where is everybody?
Yeah, well, certainly, I know that, well, senior discussions are taking place between secretaries of state and, relevant officials and ministers in the US as well. So, and there are other sort of US UK deals which are currently being looked at as well. So, I suppose this is slightly more advanced because the principle is there and it's sort of that bit is signed. Others are still being progressed as well. But of course, there's no escaping the larger, geopolitical situation at the moment, which is, frankly, for the US government, this is nobody's priority, at least in the short term. There are so many other things which they need to sort out, given the conflicts which are taking place. So we need to move out of that phase so that we can then get back to those negotiations. Now, as far as again, the UK is concerned, I think, again, as Andy was touching on, the nature of the NHS is so fundamental, the National Health Service, to UK society and politics. But this is the chance to address, both through the deal and through the reforms which Andy was talking about as well, some of these challenges. So Wes Streeting is Secretary of State for Health, so the Senior Health Minister here in the UK, has the opportunity to try and make those changes. And he's made very clear that he has a number of priorities, for reform generally, but particularly on healthcare, which is about delivering power to the people, about freedom to the frontline staff, but with accountability. Interestingly, shifting from sort of crisis to crisis, which often happens, across to something more preventative, again, which Andy talked about. Improved productivity, again, the use of technology, AI, and others to deliver that. And if those can address, and just the last one, which is probably I'm not sure about the most important, but it's certainly an important consideration, which is spending taxpayers' money with care. So the use of, and this is, any politician, any government across any member state that absolutely gets this is, it will be looked upon as, as a genius by others. That we can't rely on economic growth, it appears, anymore to pay for the ever-increasing healthcare. So how do we do it? Well, it appears to be a mix of those things, but particularly technology. And if we can break that, I suppose, causal link between just more money and it goes on health, and somehow the budgets go up and up, that isn't, again, as Andy talked about, isn't going to be possible. And frankly, if this UK government, and I think this is a really important consideration when looking at any deals that we're doing, if this government has got another 2 or 3 years before it needs to face a general election again, if it is going to be re-elected, it has to do three things, I think. One is deliver some economic growth, which frankly seems to be eluding most governments at the moment, but that. Secondly, and again, apologies for bringing this back down to very base politics, but stopping the small boats, i.e., those trying to come into the country without permission in some way, shape, or form. I'll just leave it like that. But thirdly, cutting the waiting lists for the NHS. So that is a really critical point. And Streeting has the opportunity to look at those reforms, look at the role of technology, use this deal to get the medicines in so people can see a real difference. Because otherwise, if he doesn't do that, then I think those wider challenges, which again Andy talked very eloquently about, and taking us through, will be pretty fundamental to the future of healthcare in this country and further afield as well.
So basically, it is a pivotal point. It is an opportunity where you can really change tack because there's a driving force now. As I mentioned in the beginning, of course, in the EU, it is discussed also very much from different viewpoints. How would you say, well, rather, how would the EU benefit from what you are trying to do, what the UK is trying to do? I mean, the systems are different. Of course, the NHS is state funded, healthcare is free. In the EU, typically, it's based or it's paid through the insurance companies. Now there's concern again in Germany, just expressed very freshly, that the rates are rising and continue to rise and things like that. So it's a different system. But what is it that you would say could be taken as, let's say, the starting point or some pointers for the EU and member states to find their approach, their way into a new, well, new system thinking, let's use your words, on healthcare. How would you see that?
I think this, and as this conversation is opening up, it's much more than about pricing, important as that is. It's about the relationship between government, uh, the pharmaceutical innovation, life sciences innovation, and the sustainability of their health systems, all wrapped within a new emerging trade context, which is becoming more complicated. So this, I think, what this is opening up is that we can't talk about drug pricing simply as a health cost issue. It is wrapped around a bigger set of issues, as Stuart has been unpacking there for us. So in order that sustainable health systems remain sustainable in the future, we need to look at cost containment, and that's been largely where we've been at. But with the acceleration of biotech and the new possibilities come through there, innovation is going to play a greater role in helping us to manage the costs and the unfolding of the trajectories of disease within our particular countries. So there's a kind of uncomfortable tension building about whether do we think about drug pricing from a cost containment, or do we encourage innovation to bring a transformation in the way healthcare is delivered? And how do we balance those two tensions in a global arena in which the decisions about drug pricing in the US are now having repercussions across the world? So we can't make those choices in glorious isolation. We're also subject somewhat to the pressures of what's going on in the global context. So how do European countries individually think about that question? What's the challenge for the EU in sort of stewarding and holding the field for those conversations? Because decisions in local countries are going to impact the global picture and thereby definition other European countries. So there's probably a need to coordinate some sort of centralized view of how we're going to navigate through that process, knowing that individual countries need to make their own decisions. But innovation versus cost containment versus industrial strategy versus the global trade picture, which is becoming quite complex, has now taken drug pricing into a sort of a systems thinking arena of which multiple actors will need to convene and come together to understand the best way forward. And I think the UK approach is an example of the thinking that's been done here that may give some clues to what could be done, but Europe will need to come to its own conclusions. And so there's some interesting times ahead.
And I think just to throw into this, almost I'm going to say this blithely, and then I'll look to be corrected by you both. But look, in some ways, it doesn't matter what the system is, insurance, NHS, or hybrid version, whatever. What do we want as citizens of the country in which we live? We want access to good healthcare. I don't care whether that's operations, preventative, drugs, whatever it is. I just want to have access to that so that I'm still around to see my kids grow up, or spend time with loved ones, etc. And I think if we keep hold of that, rather than getting, I suppose, too bogged down in the relative merits of systems, that should be the driver of government. How do we as a government achieve that for our citizens? Because that is a pretty universal, I would contend, requirement of any health system.
That's absolutely true, and it's also something that's acknowledged in the EU. Different policy makers, different representatives of government or the EU Commission agree all on that. The tricky part is the path to achieving that. And in the name, the US-UK pharma trade deal is already the conflict embedded, because pharma is member state authority in the EU and trade is commission authority. So it will really be a concerted, it has to be a concerted effort to really get it right. But definitely the objective, I think everybody agrees on that. And that is also something I think that's very critical when it comes to who will get elected, because the population is very sensitive when it comes to what is it that I deserve or get out of the system. How will I be taken care of, and who is paying for it, and can it be paid for? And will new drugs be available? So there is a tremendous pressure on doing it right. And there's many, many initiatives in the EU that are happening to drive this forward into a new future, which hopefully which is another tricky part, combining healthcare with industrial policy. Because that's one of the other things that has been talked about so much, and everybody says that. You mentioned that before. It's a pillar of wealth in the EU. It is in the UK. It's an industry that's typically very profitable. It is powerful. It drives innovation, research. It provides high-paying jobs. So it definitely is an incentive overall when you look at it. How can you establish that, grow that? And across the board, everybody agrees that Europe, and that includes the UK, has wonderful research and great foundation. The question is, how do you turn that into commercially viable, successful, and longer term, really growth-oriented companies that create jobs? So that definitely remains a challenge. But I'm absolutely with you. The ultimate goal is clear. So we need to find a way to get there.
I would agree with you, Rainer. And why this conversation is so important is that the pace and rate of drug discovery and drug innovation, we've been used to a certain sort of cadence and rhythm to that over the last decades. This is fundamentally going to change. The acceleration coming through in biotech now means we're going to get a rapid acceleration of new drug and new treatment discovery. Therefore, we're going to have to not just think about today's model, but the emerging one, and how we create the conditions for the successful adoption, the development and adoption of these new treatments that are going to come through in an ever more accelerating rate. And part of that is the money we're prepared to spend on that, and to create the conditions from which that can arise. But a huge challenge also, and it's the work that I'm seeing a lot from the lack of joined up thinking between life sciences and healthcare, is that with the acceleration of new drug discovery is the acceleration of how the health systems metabolize that and bring that into fruition in terms of new treatment pathways, new capacities and capabilities to host and deliver the new treatments and services that come off the back of this. And health systems are still working in the old paradigm of new drugs coming along now and again, not an accelerated pipeline that involves perhaps earlier interception of disease that brings the need for delivery perhaps to other parts of the healthcare system that weren't usually involved in this. So there's structural changes required to metabolize this through the whole ecosystem that really needs to foment a more general conversation across different parts of this sector to come together to host what will be in the future a much more dynamic environment, and an environment that heralds great possibilities for the improvement of health, but only if we get our act together as a whole sector.
And I would just throw into that as well, which is, again, the UK government is very acutely aware, particularly the US, but I think, some member states as well, are much better at having, developing innovation. Sorry, that's the wrong phrase. That's the wrong phrase. But, having innovation developed in the country, and then it disappears off somewhere else to grow. Sorry, I've explained that very badly, but that's a sort of the. So the US are very good at innovating and keeping them there, utilizing those ideas, excuse me, and then, growing from that point. In the UK, that traditionally hasn't been the case. So that's, again, it's another area where policy for life sciences, innovation, biotech, as well as Andy mentioned, is, it strays into that sort of business and trade side of things, which is how do we keep our ideas here, utilize them here for a period of time, and then they can go off around the world. We've never been very good at that, and this government is certainly trying to put some measures in place to do that, which I think, again, will help with Andy's sort of, if we just get used to that constant cycle of innovation, an idea that, new drugs or tech or whatever it happens to be are coming through because they're here, we can see them, the sector can see them. I think that will help with the rollout as well.
What I'm hearing is there's a common thread in a sense. It requires a concerted effort, a holistic approach, a systems thinking to look at all the pieces of the puzzle rather than focusing only on one aspect, drug prices or regulatory environment for a capital market in the EU, for example, which is one of the weak points. We don't have a comparable EU NASDAQ where companies could go public. The Biotech Act 1, which is very focused on health biotech, is really a starting point in the sense of a big discussion where there's a lot of things around regulatory changes and hopefully lowering the burdens, increasing attractiveness for clinical trials and things like that. But all of that are just pieces. It's not really making a whole. And what I'm hearing from you is that the EU is maybe a little further down the road because of that deal and because of everything that happened there to try to really address these challenges. And the EU can indeed learn from the progress that has been made, or maybe even just the discussions and the thinking that went into where you are today. And that is, I think, the message that we can take with and leave with our viewers. I think that was, of course, just the surface and just talking about some of the things, but I think it was a very good starting point and very good insights. Thank you very much for your time, for your insights, and being our guest. We hope to see you again, and that would be my sign off for today. Again, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.